A crowbar slammed down hard on a rusted hinge. Wood splintered. A second blow tore the warped floorboard loose and sent it skidding across the cabin. Underneath was dirt. Then something else. Something flat. Something metal. A boot pressed down to clear the dust. A hand reached in. The box came up heavy, the kind of heavy that meant it had been buried with weight inside, not stones. The lid wouldn't budge. A knife went in. Then a hammer. Then both hands. The latch finally gave with a dry crack that echoed through an empty house. Inside was a stack of letters. 40 of them. All addressed to a name the man holding the box had not heard spoken in 53 years. His own. What Henry Vale read in the next hour rewrote everything he believed about the father who walked out on him. Stay with me on this one. Henry Vale was 61 years old and had not asked anybody for anything in 22 years. He lived alone on a ridge 3 miles from the nearest road. His cabin was small. 2 rooms, a stove, a porch he had built with his own hands. He kept a dog once. The dog died. He never got another. People in town called him friendly enough, but knew better than to expect him for supper. He came down twice a month for flour and ammunition and went back up the same day. His wife had died 9 years ago. Cancer. Quick. She was the last person he had loved out loud, and after she went, he stopped saying things out loud altogether. He had a son. The son lived in Spokane and worked in a bank and called twice a year. Henry took the calls. He answered the questions. He did not extend them. That was the life he had chosen, and it suited him. Now here's the thing about Henry. He had not always been quiet. As a boy, he had been the loudest one in the room. That ended when he was 8 years old. When he was 8 years old, his father walked out. He remembered that morning the way you remember a wound. His father had kissed his head, told his mother he would be back by dark, and never came back at all. There was no note. There was no goodbye. There was no money sent. His mother told him when he asked that some men aren't built for staying. She said it without bitterness, because his mother was not a bitter woman. She raised him on a waitress's wages and a boarding house garden, and went to her grave, still saying his father had been a good man who simply could not stay. Henry had spent 53 years calling her wrong about that. A good man stayed. A good man came back. A man who walked out on a boy and a wife was not a good man. End of conversation. End of feeling. He had built his whole self around that sentence. So when the call came from the county clerk last Tuesday, Henry took the job because it was simple work and the pay was honest. A man 2 ridges over had died alone in his cabin during the winter. Nobody had claimed the body. The county had buried him in a small plot behind the cabin and put the place up for clearance. Could Henry handle it before the snow came back? Just empty it out. Salvage what was useful. Burn what wasn't. Make the structure safe to demolish in the spring. Henry said yes. The clerk thanked him and gave him an address and a name. The name meant nothing to Henry at the time. He drove out the next morning with a truck bed of tools and a thermos of coffee. The road in was bad. The last half mile was a dirt path he had to walk because his truck wouldn't make the grade. He carried his crowbar and his hammer and a coil of rope, and he came over the rise, and there it was. The cabin was older than his by maybe 20 years. Smaller. Cedar shake roof going green at the corners. A stone chimney. A porch leaning slightly to the west. A man had lived here a long time. You could tell by the way the path to the woodpile was beaten into the ground. Henry went inside. The air was stale but clean. Somebody had kept the place. The bed was made. The dishes were stacked. A coffee pot still sat on the stove, with the grounds rinsed out. Whoever had lived here had left the house in order before he died, like a man who knew company was coming. Henry started where he always started. Walls, cabinets, drawers. He worked through the front room first, pulled what was useful, stacked what was burnable. Then he came to the back wall. There was a photograph hanging there, a black and white, a woman holding a baby on her hip and squinting into the sun. The frame was cheap. The picture was faded. Henry looked at it for a long second because the woman looked familiar in a way he couldn't place. He took it down to throw it on the burn pile and stopped. That was when he noticed the floor. One board near the corner had been pried up and put back. Recently, the dust around it was lighter than the dust everywhere else. The nails sat a little higher. Somebody had worked under that board, and not long ago. Henry crouched down with the crowbar. The board came up easier than he expected. Somebody had pulled it before, knew where the give was. He set it aside and looked into the hole. The dirt had been freshly turned at some point in the last few years. Not yesterday, but not decades either. He brushed it away with his hand and felt the corner of something hard. The box was metal. Army green. The kind of toolbox a man buys once and uses for 40 years. He worked it loose and lifted it out and set it on the kitchen table. The lid was rusted shut. He fought it with a knife, then a hammer, then both hands. The latch finally gave with a dry crack. Inside was a stack of letters tied with kitchen twine. He pulled out the top letter. The envelope was old, but the handwriting on the front was clear. 2 words, a first name and a last name. His, Henry Vale. He sat down hard on the wooden chair behind him. For a long minute he didn't open it. He just sat there and looked at his own name in a stranger's hand. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Slanted, careful. The hand of a man who had practiced what he wanted to say and then practiced it again before putting it down. Henry untied the twine. He opened the first letter. There was no greeting. The date at the top read October 4th, 1971. That was 3 months after his father walked out. Henry's stomach turned over. The letter said this: "Today you turn 9 years old. I don't know where you are. I drove all the way to Bakersfield because the man at the bus station told me a woman with a small boy bought tickets there last spring. The trail went cold. I'm going to keep going. I love you, son. I'm sorry." It was signed simply, Dad. Henry didn't move. The chair creaked under him. His hands were heavier than they had been a minute ago. He picked up the second letter. October 4th, 1972. Today you turn 10. I'm in Reno now. The car broke down outside Winnemucca, and I worked at a feed store for the summer to fix it. A woman who came in for chicken feed had a son your age. I almost asked her if she knew you. I didn't. I keep not asking the right questions. I love you, son. I'm sorry. He read the third one. The fourth. The fifth. Every letter was dated October 4th. Every letter was addressed to him. Every letter was from a man who had been looking for him. Every letter was from his father. Believe me, Henry Vale had built his life on the certainty that the man who had written these letters did not exist. The man who had written these letters was a phantom, a story his mother told to keep her boy from hating the world. The man who had written these letters had walked out and never come back. Except he had come back. He had been coming back, in the only way he could, every year for 53 years. Henry kept reading. By the 15th letter, the writing got smaller. The man was running out of paper, or running out of money, or running out of words. The leads got fainter. A trail in Boise. A tip in Eugene. A woman in Tacoma who fit his ex-wife's description, but vanished before he could verify. In the letter dated 1985, the tone changed. Today you turn 23. I found you. You're working construction in a town called Riverton, Oregon. You're a man now. You have a beard. You have a girlfriend named Sarah. I sat in a diner across the street and watched you eat lunch. I didn't come over. I'll explain why someday. I love you, son. I'm sorry. Henry's mouth went dry. The next letter, 1986. I came back. I sat in the same diner. You weren't there. I went to the construction site. The foreman said you and Sarah had moved up to Washington. I followed. I found you on the mountain. You built a cabin 2 ridges from mine. I think you don't know I'm here. I think nobody told you anything. I'm going to keep watching. I'm not going to come down. I made a promise. Henry's hand started shaking. He didn't stop reading. The years rolled by, 1990, 1995, 2001, 2010. The man wrote one letter every year. He recorded what he had seen of his son's life from a distance. The wedding day. The birth of his grandson. The year the dog died. The year Sarah died. He had been there for all of it. 2 ridges away. Watching. The last letter was dated October 4th, 2024. Last year. Today you turned 62. I am dying. The doctor says weeks. I don't have time to do this right. I can't come down now and ask you to forgive a man you don't know. So I am going to leave everything here. The letters, the journal, the photographs, the truth. If you ever find them, son, you'll know. I love you. I'm sorry. Signed, Dad. Walter Vale. Henry sat at the kitchen table for a very long time after that. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just sat. The letters were stacked on the wood in front of him. His own name in his father's hand. 53 letters. 53 birthdays. A man who had been looking for him from the day he turned 9 until the year he turned 62. A man who had found him and watched him from 2 ridges over for 36 of those years. After a while, Henry stood up. His knees ached. He carried the letters out to the porch. He sat down on the top step. The afternoon was quiet. The kind of mountain quiet you get when the wind has gone still and nothing is moving. Henry breathed in. He told himself it was a lot. He told himself the man was dead now, and there was nothing more to find, and he had what he needed. He had the truth. He had the letters. He could take them home and read them slow and grieve a father he had never known he had. That was enough. He got up to gather the letters and go. That's when he saw it. There was one more envelope at the bottom of the box. He had missed it because it was smaller than the others and pressed against the metal corner. Different paper. Different handwriting. His mother's handwriting. Henry knew that hand the way a man knows his own. She had written him 100 letters when he was in the army. She had written notes on his lunch sacks until he was 16. He could pick her writing out of 1,000. He sat back down on the porch step. He opened the envelope. Inside was one sheet of paper, folded twice. The date at the top was March 12, 1996. That was the year his mother died. She had written this letter 8 days before her death. Henry's hand started to tremble. The letter said this: Walter, I am dying. I am writing this to you because I owe you the truth before I go, and because the truth is something Henry can never know. Please honor that even after I'm gone." Henry read it twice. He didn't understand it the first time. The second time it landed. "I took him from you because of what they were going to do to you." The sheriff's deputy in Modesto, the one who came to the house after the fight at the bar, the one who said you would be charged with what happened to that girl. You know what happened. We both know what happened. But you also know nobody in that town would have believed you. Not a man like you. Not in 1971. They were going to put you away for 30 years for something you didn't do, and Henry was going to grow up with a father in prison and a name people spat on. So I ran. I told him you walked out. I let him grow up hating you instead of being ashamed of you. I thought that was the smaller wound. I'm not sure anymore." She went on. "I know you found us. I know you've been near him for years. Walter, please. He's a good man now. He has a wife and a son, and a life he built with his own hands. If you go to him now and tell him everything, you take that life from him. You make him a stranger to himself. I'm asking you, as the woman who once loved you, please don't undo him. If he ever finds you, tell him I'm sorry. But until he finds you, let him be." It was signed simply, Annie. Henry put the letter down. He put both hands flat on the wood of the porch. Now here's where the story turns. Everything Henry had believed about his life was wrong twice over. Not once. Twice. His father had not abandoned him. His mother had taken him. His father had found him. His mother had asked his father not to come. His father had honored that promise for 36 years. The bitterness Henry had carried for 53 years. The reason he had built a life of solitude. The reason he could not love his son the way his son needed to be loved. All of it had been built on a story. The story had been told with love. The story had been a lie. Henry sat very still on the porch step. If you're still with me on this one, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. There's another turn coming, and this one is harder than the first. I want to make sure you don't miss it. Henry wiped his face with the back of his hand. He went back inside. He looked at the box one more time, the way a man looks at a door he has not yet decided to open. There was something taped to the underside of the lid. He had missed it. A small key. It was a brass key. The kind that fits a desk drawer or a small cabinet. Henry stood up and looked around the room. The cabin was small. There was only one piece of furniture that could match a key like that. A writing desk under the back window. He had walked past it 3 times that morning and not opened it. He went to the desk. He tried the top drawer. Locked. The key fit. The drawer slid open. Inside were photographs. Hundreds of them. Photographs of Henry. Henry lifted them out in handfuls. The earliest ones were grainy, taken from a distance. A boy in a baseball uniform. A teenager working at a hay bale. A young man at a college graduation Henry had almost forgotten attending. Then they got closer. Higher quality. A wedding day. Henry kissing Sarah outside a small church in Oregon. The day his son was born. Sarah carrying the baby out of the hospital. His father had been there. At his wedding. At his son's birth. Henry sat on the floor of the cabin and went through every photograph. There were photographs of his cabin under construction. His father had watched him build it. There were photographs of his dog. There were photographs of Sarah's funeral. His father had stood somewhere in the back of that crowd and watched his son grieve and said nothing. The last photograph in the drawer was dated last summer. It was Henry, chopping wood at his own cabin. Bare-armed. The shot was taken from the tree line. Henry remembered that day. He remembered, very suddenly, a man on the trail 2 summers ago. An older fellow with a gray beard and a worn jacket. The man had tipped his hat without speaking and kept walking. Henry had nodded back. They had passed each other on the ridge and gone on with their afternoons. That had been his father. Underneath the photographs was a leather-bound journal. Brown, cracked along the spine. The kind of journal a man buys when he expects to write in it for a long time. Henry sat down on the floor with his back against the desk and opened it. The first entry was dated April 17, 1985. The day his father had found him. I sat across from him in a diner today. He didn't know me. He didn't even look at me twice. He had her eyes. He had my hands. He stirred his coffee the way I stir mine. I almost crossed that diner floor. I almost tapped him on the shoulder. I almost said the words. Then I remembered her letter, and I sat where I was, and I let him eat his lunch, and I left. The next entry was 1986. The next was 1987. The next was every few months. Then every month. The journal ran for 36 years. Every entry was a sighting. Every entry was a refusal. Saw him at the hardware store on Front Street. He bought roofing nails. He's building something. Saw his wife today. She is kind. She held the door for an old woman. He chose well. My grandson was born last Tuesday. I drove to the hospital. I sat in the parking lot for 4 hours. I saw Sarah carry him out. I saw Henry holding her elbow. I went home. His dog died. He carried it up the hill behind the cabin and buried it himself. He cried. I have never seen him cry before. I wanted to come down. I did not come down. Sarah is sick. I heard it from the woman at the post office. I lit a candle for her in my kitchen tonight. I do not know if Henry would have wanted me to. Sarah is gone. I went to the funeral. I stood at the back. I did not let him see me. He did not look up. I am glad I came. Henry closed his eyes for a long minute and opened them again and kept reading. The entries thinned out as the years went on. The handwriting got worse. The man's body was failing. He wrote about pain in his chest. He wrote about a doctor in town who had told him plainly what was coming. He wrote about how little time he had left. The second-to-last entry was dated September 30th, 2024. I walked the trail to his ridge today. It took me 4 hours. It used to take me 2. I sat on the rock above his cabin and watched him chop wood. He is 61, and he moves like a younger man. He looks like my father did at that age. I want to come down. I want to say I am here. I want to tell him she lied because she was afraid, and that I am not the man he was told I was, and that I am sorry for every birthday I sent into a mailbox that nobody read. But the doctor says weeks, and I do not have time to do this right. So I will leave it all here. If he ever finds it, he will know. The final entry was 3 days later. October 3rd, 2024. I am going to bury the box tonight. The board is loose. The dirt is soft. I will put everything in there. The letters. This journal. The photographs. The key. Tomorrow is his birthday. I will write him one more letter. Then I am done. Henry closed the journal. He sat on the floor of his father's cabin for a long time. He didn't move for an hour. He did not know he wasn't moving. The light through the window changed. The afternoon got long. The shadows lengthened. Somewhere in the trees, a jay called, and another jay answered, and the sound went through Henry like a hand on his shoulder. He cried then. He cried the way A man cries when he has not cried in 9 years. It came out of him in waves. It came from somewhere deep in his chest. It came for his father. It came for his mother. It came for the boy he had been at 9 years old who had decided, on the floor of a kitchen in 1971, that he was going to be a hard man because hard men did not get left. He had spent 53 years being a hard man. He had been wrong. When he was done, he stood up. He washed his face at the sink. He drank a glass of cold water. He walked outside. The grave was behind the cabin, just like the clerk had said. A small mound. A wooden marker. The marker had been hand-carved. The letters were uneven. They said only this: WALTER Vale, 1936 to 2024. No epitaph. No words. The man had carved his own marker before he died and had not written a single thing about himself. Henry knelt down in front of it. He put his hand on the wood. He said, "Hi, Dad." His voice broke on the word. He had not spoken that word in 53 years. He had refused it. He had cut it out of his mouth like a tooth. He said it again. "Hi, Dad. I'm Henry." He stayed there a long time. The wind picked up in the pines above him. He told the wood what he should have told the man. He told him about Sarah. He told him about the boy. He told him about the dog. He told him about the cabin he had built with his own hands 2 ridges away. He told him about every year he had hated him for nothing. And then, at the end, he said the words his father had written 53 times in 53 letters and never been able to deliver. "I forgive you," Henry said. "I forgive her. I'm sorry I didn't know." He stayed by the grave until the sun went down. Henry did not go home that night. He slept in his father's bed. The sheet smelled faintly of cedar and old soap. He lay on his back and stared at the rough boards of the ceiling and did not sleep until very late, and when he finally slept, he slept hard. He did not go home the next day either. He stayed 3 days at the cabin. He started by fixing the floorboard. He put the planks back the way his father had set them. He nailed them down clean. He swept the dust. He aired the rooms. He washed the coffee pot in the sink. He treated the place the way a son treats his father's house, not the way a man treats a job. He went back through the cabin slow. He found things he had missed the first time. A pocket knife on a shelf. A small wooden duck his father had carved. A bookmarked Bible with Henry's name written in the front in his father's slanted hand, like the man had bought it the day he gave up looking and meant to give it to him someday. He kept all of it. On the second day, he walked the trail between the 2 cabins. It was an old trail. A deer trail mostly, but there were boot prints in some of the softer dirt that were not his own. His father had walked this path. Often. For decades. Henry had passed his father's place 100 times in his life and never once stopped. He went to the rock above his own ridge. He sat on it. He looked down at his own cabin from his father's vantage point. He saw the woodpile. He saw the porch. He saw the tools laid out by the side door. He saw what his father had seen. A son. Alive. Working. Whole. Henry sat on that rock and he thought about his son. His son lived in Spokane. His son worked in a bank. His son had a wife Henry had only met twice, and a daughter Henry had never been alone in a room with. They called him every 6 months. He answered. He did not extend the conversation. He did not invite them up. He let his son drift the way he had once let himself drift, because he had been raised by a woman who told him men did not stay, and he had decided, somewhere along the way, that not staying was just how it worked in his blood. That was over now. On the 3rd day, Henry packed his truck. He put the letters in a wooden crate his father had built. He put the journal on top. He put the photographs in an envelope. He put the brass key in his pocket. Before he left, he hung the photograph back on the wall. The black and white. The woman holding a baby on her hip and squinting into the sun. It was his mother. The baby was him. His father had kept that photograph on his wall for 38 years. Henry left it where it had always been. He drove home slow. He took the long road. The mountains went by gold and red, and the late afternoon light was on his face, and he drove with one hand on the wheel and the other on the crate beside him. When he got to his cabin, he carried the crate inside and set it on the kitchen table. He poured himself coffee. He sat down. He picked up the phone. His son answered on the third ring. "Hey, Dad." Henry took a breath. "Son, I need you to come up for a weekend. Bring Lisa. Bring Maddie. There's something I need to tell you. About your grandfather." There was a long pause on the other end. "Dad, I never met my grandfather." "You did," Henry said. "I just didn't know." His son was quiet on the line for a long time. Then he said, "Are you all right?" "I am now," Henry said. "Come up, please." His son came up that weekend. He brought his wife. He brought his daughter, who was 7. Henry had not seen the girl since she was a baby. They sat at the kitchen table. Henry showed them the letters. He showed them the journal. He showed them the photographs. He showed them the picture of Walter Vale in the back row of Sarah's funeral, hat in his hand, a man Henry's son had walked past without seeing on the worst day of their lives. They cried together at that table. The first time Henry had cried with his son in his life. The girl, Maddie, sat on the floor and looked at the photographs the way a child looks at a treasure. She picked up the wooden duck and held it in her small hands. "Was he nice?" she asked. Henry knelt down beside her. He thought about what to say. He was the kind of man who walked 4 hours up a trail to watch his son chop wood from a rock, Henry said, and then walked 4 hours back without saying hello. Because he had made a promise and he kept it. "That's nice," Maddie said. "Yes," Henry said. It was. That winter Henry hung a new photograph on the wall above his stove. A man holding a baby on a porch. The man was young. The baby was small. Both of them were laughing. It was the only photograph Walter Vale had kept of himself with his son. He had taken it the day Henry was born, and he had carried it for 53 years. Henry stood in front of it most mornings now. He drank his coffee there. He talked to it the way a man talks to company. The man who had walked up to that cabin had gone alone for 61 years. The man who came down had family.